Back in 1987, Chrysler introduced a pair of new compact cars, the Dodge Shadow and Plymouth Sundance, intended to be a step up from the subcompact Omni and Horizon. As yet another variant of Chrysler's ubiquitous K-car, the Sundance got a controversial Duster trim option, while the Dodge got a convertible, and a rare Shelby performance model called the CSX, which most people probably never even knew existed. This is a story of the Dodge Shadow and Plymouth Sundance. This is my old car.
The new Dodge Shadow is going to cast a giant shadow across America. Dodge setting new standards for performance.
Thanks for so many suggestions for an episode on the Shadow and Sundance. And continue thanks to all of you for so many additional ideas for future episodes, including many cars I didn't even remember seeing back in the day, which inspired me to do my previous episode on Peugeot cars in America. Be sure to check my channel page to see if I've already done an episode on one of your old cars. As I noted in my introduction, the Shadow and Sundance were among what now seems like 100 different cars that can trace their roots back to the original Chrysler K-car platform, which debuted in 1981 with the Dodge Aries and Plymouth Reliant. And yes, I do plan at some point to do an episode on those cars as well.
Plymouth is the American way to get your money's worth.
At the time, the original K-cars were classified as mid-sized, although if you parked one of them next to any new compact car today, such as a current generation Toyota Corolla, the mid-size K-car is about 4 inches shorter, a clear example of how cars in general have grown substantially over the years. As was the case with many Chrysler products back then, offering essentially the same car badged as both the Dodge and Plymouth had become so standard that no one seemed to question it back then.
Introducing Plymouth Sundance and Dodge Shadow. Features you once paid extra for, now come standard.
Whereas today, such blatant badge engineering has become less common. Typically, Plymouth was considered to be the more value-oriented model, whereas Dodge was supposed to be a little more sporty in nature. For the most part, however, that wasn't the case with the Shadow and Sundance predecessors, the Dodge Omni and Plymouth Horizon. With a couple trim exceptions, they were the same car. I did an episode on these cars a few months ago, so check it out if you haven't already seen it. After you're done watching this one, of course. Early on, Dodge and Plymouth twins were typically just that, twins, and the Dodge version didn't always offer a sportier option. For example, there was never a sporty version of the Dodge Aries, or Dodge's next most famous car of the 80s, the Caravan. Well, there was eventually a sort of sporty Caravan, but that's a story for a future episode. The Dodge Omni did offer a high-performance trim called the GLH, which wasn't offered on the Horizon. The Horizon instead offered what was known as the America trim, a nice patriotic name that tried to hide what it really was. A stripped-down bargain option. By the mid-80s, the Omni and Horizon still sold well, but Chrysler wanted to offer a slightly larger model, as the Omni and Horizon had been around since 1978, and were proportioned more like a Chevy Chevette in size. The success of the original K-car had spawned two other variations, the G platform, which was the basis of the Dodge Daytona in 1984, and the H platform, which was the basis of the mid-size Dodge Lancer in 1985. The Daytona suspension and some interior design was combined with a shortened version of the Lancer to create the P platform, which would become the new Shadow and Sundance. Their introduction was planned for 1986 as 1987 models.
And at $74.99, it's going to cast a giant shadow across America.
And Chrysler was planning up to that point to have them officially replace the Omni and Horizon. However, the latter two cars were still selling well, so that, combined with the fact that these now 9-year-old cars were closer to paying off their design and production tooling costs, any additional sales meant more profit. So the Omni and Horizon continued production for 3 more model years, finally ending in 1990. They may have lasted longer than that, but by then, the Shadow and Sundance were starting to significantly take away many of those sales. To help distinguish themselves from the cars they replaced, but still offer the same versatility, the Shadow and Sundance appeared to have the standard 3-box design of a coupe, but they were actually hatchbacks. If you owned a Shadow or Sundance in its first model year of 1987, you either had the base model with its 97 horsepower 2.2-liter 4-cylinder, or maybe you stepped up to the Shadow's ES trim, which had an added turbocharger, bringing the horsepower up to 146.
The Shadow's got a turbo engine the Sentra doesn't even offer.
In 1988, Plymouth offered an RS, or Rally Sport trim, for the Sundance, with a 2.5-liter turbo, which shifted from the only Dodge gets a sporty model plan. But from a distance, the only way to tell the Dodge apart from the Plymouth was the front grille. If you lived in Europe in 1988, you could get the same car, but it was marketed there as a Chrysler ES, and looked just like the Dodge Shadow ES, minus the Shadow badging, but it never sold nearly as well. ending its run in Europe by 1991. But if neither of those turbo options were enough, there was a better option, the Shelby CSX. The letters CSX were short for Carroll Shelby Experimental, and it was the official successor to the Omni GLHS. The Shelby CSX wasn't badged as a Dodge or Plymouth. It was a Shelby. It even had its own unique front grille, and a Shelby-produced 2.2-liter intercooled turbo 4-cylinder that made 175 horsepower, and ran a then impressive 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.8 seconds. Only 750 were ever made for the 1987 model year. Shelby followed up the CSX model with the CSX-T in 1988, but you couldn't buy that one unless you worked for the thrifty rental car company, as the CSX-T was an exclusive offering just for thrifty customers, similar to how Shelby provided a special line of Mustangs for Hertz back in 1966. The CSX-T was mechanically the same as the previous year's CSX, except for one important difference. Shelby's turbo was replaced with a standard Chrysler turbo. 1001 models of the CSX-T were built, all in the same white with gray and blue trim. Shelby's final version came in 1989 with the CSX VNT, with the VNT meaning variable nozzle turbo, which could adjust the flow of exhaust into the turbocharger via computer, effectively eliminating turbo lag. This new turbo engine, which was Chrysler designed, had the same horsepower rating as Shelby's 1987 model, but the VNT increased the old model's 175 pound-feet of torque to 205, and also had a Gatrag 5-speed transmission. Only 500 were made, and officially marked the end of Carroll Shelby's direct involvement with Chrysler, although he did return later in an advisory role for the 92 Dodge Viper. Most everyone else that had a Dodge Shadow or Plymouth Sundance in 1989 had the option of a base 4-cylinder or the 2.5-liter turbo, but they all had an improved look that year thanks to new composite headlamps, along with a refresh of the front grille and tail lamps.
Or dress them up with optional youth sport package, including sunroof, AM/FM stereo cassette, and more powerful sporty engine.
But the biggest change came in 1991 with the introduction of a convertible, although only for the Dodge. Unlike many convertibles back then that were converted from coupes via aftermarket companies, such as American Sunroof Corporation, the Shadow convertible was built in the same Michigan plant as the coupe, and it got a slightly better base engine, a 2.5-liter 4 that made 100 horsepower, although it was also available in the Turbo ES trim, but the convertible only lasted through 1993. 1991 also marked the start of other trim options across both the Shadow and Sundance, with the base models renamed to Highline, a name which to me made no sense for a base model. The Sundance got even cheaper than base model, called the America, the trim name that the old Plymouth Horizon also had as its bargain stripped-down version. And in 1992, the Sundance dropped its RS trim name for a more nostalgic, although maybe less appropriate name, the Duster.
Oh, buy me, please buy me!
Plymouth used the Duster name as a sporty trim on their Valiant model from 1970 through 76, so the idea of bringing back a name once used on a V8 muscle car probably didn't set well with a lot of old Mopar fans. From the outside, with the Duster badges just being decals, I remember at the time not being that impressed, thinking that using the Duster name was more of just a marketing gimmick than anything else. Starting in 1992, both the Shadow and Sundance began offering a Mitsubishi-built 3-liter V6, replacing the turbo 4-cylinder engines. This same engine had already been proven in several other Chrysler models by that point, such as the Daytona, the LeBaron, and even the Chrysler TC by Maserati, which by the way wasn't a high-end LeBaron but actually a different car, something I should have made clear in my earlier LeBaron episode. And yes, the TC may get its own My Old Car episode at some point. Up until 1993, the combined sales of the Shadow and Sundance were averaging a combined total of around 150,000 cars sold per year, but by the end of 1993, that combined total reached over 200,000, their best during their entire run. Although the Plymouth's low-priced America and Highline trims were dropped that year, they were replaced with better-equipped base models, an attempt to move away from the bad image overly cheap cars can bring.
So well equipped, and that racy V6 would drive anyone wild.
Despite the improved sales, both the Shadow and Sundance's days were numbered,
We have so much in common.
Like a choice of warranties.
with their replacement already in the works, the Dodge and Plymouth Neon, which was known as the Chrysler Neon in Europe. And unlike the old Omni and Horizon, which Chrysler opted to overlap production with their successor, the Neon was scheduled to be built in the same Michigan plant as the Shadow and Sundance, so no overlap could be done this time. The Neon proved to be a big hit, enough that it earned a second generation, something its predecessor never got. Although the Shadow and Sundance today look like typical 80s boxy styling, when put in perspective of what Chrysler had offered just a few years earlier, they were a far less boxy alternative. But with the trend across the car industry moving to more aerodynamic cars by the early 90s, especially at Chrysler, it was inevitable that the Shadow and Sundance couldn't last in their current form. Today it is rare to ever see one of these cars on the road, as I can't recall the last time I saw one. But in the early 90s, I saw them on the road every day. They were a significant step in evolution of the Chrysler K car, and in my view, were a significant step in Chrysler's 90s revival.
7. Okay.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.